There is a tension here between justice and stabilization that cannot be avoided, cannot be ignored, cannot be denied. And so this tension is one of the most difficult challenges that a new democracy has to ponder and face. And it's a tension that both Juan Lentz and Samuel Huntington in the Third Wave have written very considerably and very wisely about. This is clearly a problem to which they've devoted very considerable thought, along with their colleagues in the literature, such as Alfred Stapon and the great scholars of democratic transition, Philippe Schmitter and Guillermo O'Donnell. So here's some pragmatic advice that Juan Lentz has to offer to Democrats coming into power in a post-transition setting. First of all, don't waste political energy and capital on the politics of resentment, on fanning bitter expression of resentment against the old political order beyond what is judged to be absolutely necessary to address specific concerns for justice that are judged to be both viable in a sense of the law and viable politically to pursue. Second, don't gratuitously create a new disloyal opposition. Don't drive the partisans of the old authoritarian ruling party, the former officials from the intelligence and military apparatus, into a concerted campaign to undermine the new political order, unless really there's no choice. No choice because there's such intense and overwhelming demand for it, and no choice because they're going to overthrow you anyway unless you act against them. And we'll see how political calculation and judgment becomes a very important factor here in determining how to proceed. Try, if you can, cautions Lentz, to incorporate ambivalent groups into the new regime. Give them a stake in the system. And of course, this would particularly be true for business groups, politicians who supported the old authoritarian ruling party or cooperated with the regime, perhaps served as ministers in a military or civilian authoritarian regime, but are not intrinsically themselves autocrats and certainly not responsible for bloody repression. So those people in particular, you want to bring in to the new system and give them a stake in it. Define the truly disloyal opposition early and clearly, and as I said before, isolate it politically. Make it clear that those autocrats who have an intolerant approach and who favor the dismantling of democracy are beyond the pale. They're not going to be allied with, they're not going to be indulged, they're not going to be excused, and their rhetoric of anti-democratic sentiment and behavior will be frontally confronted and denounced as illegitimate. And then don't dispense with symbols of the past that might provide continuity in terms of the legitimacy of the new political system and its links to overarching conceptions of what the nation state is. So don't change the flag instinctively or the name of the country unless there is a compelling need to, because those things are so integrally tied up with the previous authoritarian regime. But if these are symbols that transcend an authoritarian regime and you can win legitimacy from more older and maybe more ambivalent actors by re-embracing these symbols, that may be the smart thing to do. So you want to widen the circle of legitimacy as much as possible. Bring people in who might have tolerated, cooperated with, even served in, especially a political way, the old order, but not have blood on their hands in terms of the repression. So this is Lintz's approach. Now let's look at Samuel Huntington's approach in the third wave, his book, for how to deal with the problem of the authoritarian legacy of violations of human rights. First of all, he says, and I would put a lot of this in this overarching framework, accountability is important. Justice is important. People deserve to have justice, but that has to be measured and weighed against the need to build and institutionalize democracy as well. And so my advice would be pursue that level and degree of accountability that seems feasible at a political moment, judging the relative power of these actors early on in the political system. For Huntington, this means probably the following. First of all, go after a limited number of authoritarian offenders, those who are clearly responsible with the highest command authority for the violations of human rights. But the more you go down the chain of command and try to punish and try, convict, and jail large numbers of people who were at lower levels of authority or were following orders that were given to them, the more, if you need to depend on those military officers in the new political order, you may give them an incentive to rebel against democracy. So the number of people who are tried and punished is something that has to be weighed very carefully. Second, avoid extremely divisive struggles over the past that could trigger a coup attempt or provoke some political forces questionable in their loyalty to democracy to defect from democracy and challenge the political system. Now, some of this debate over the past may simply need to be deferred. Some of it may be entrusted to a neutral Truth and Reconciliation Commission rather than simply pursued by the newly elected democratic authorities. Third, says Huntington, reassure the military officer corps that you, the elected civilian leadership, are not opposed to them as an institution, that you respect the dignity of the military and the role of the military in the country's history, in the society, and your opposition is to specific acts of violation of human rights and the rule of law, not to the military as an institution. Fourth, says Huntington, at least pursue a full and dispassionate public accounting of what happened. In other words, if you can't punish, at least establish what happened. The victims of torture and political imprisonment at least deserve that. And that may be, depending on the situation, a middle ground that at least provides some dignity and justice to those who suffered unduly, but doesn't threaten to bring down democracy in the near term. Fifth, assess realistically, and this is the point I would particularly underscore, your power as Democrats relative to the surviving autocratic forces. Maybe the autocrats crumbled in their command, and you can move against them now more broadly and with greater dispatch as a result of the way the transition happened. But if the transition happened in a way that was led from above and perhaps involved a fairly narrow and partial victory for Democrats in terms of the scope of their support in society and the range of institutions that they were able to take control of, in that situation, you may need to move more cautiously and incrementally. This isn't a question of what's moral in terms of pursuing accountability and justice, because the moral thing is to punish people for violations of the rights of their fellow citizens, and particularly for torture, extrajudicial killings, and the most extreme forms of violation of human rights. But the problem is, and this figures prominently in the writings of Max Weber, that there often is in politics a tension, if not a competition, between two forms of morality. And one morality or one ethical code says, do what's intrinsically morally right. Pursue justice, no matter what the cost or the risk. And the other moral calculus is that rulers have an obligation not to pursue ethical or moral goals in a way and to a degree where the outcome would contradict their good intentions. In other words, the ethics of responsibility may have to trump the ethics of pure morality.